Good morning, and thanks for the welcome. I'm really excited to be here because I'm a small business myself, and I love talking to anyone about this stuff. I would also like to acknowledge the Gimoy, the Walabra, the Yidinji, and the Irukandji peoples, the traditional custodians of the beautiful lands that we're on here today. I'd also like to pay my respects to their ancestors, to the elders, past, present, and future generations. And I think it's always good to take a step back and think of the wisdom of people who have been nurturing this land for tens of thousands of years. You see, in human-centered design, we also acknowledge one thing, that everything exists within a system. And if it exists within a system, you know, we've got some responsibilities ourselves to look after that system and to understand that we are not apart from nature, we are nature. We're endowed with responsibilities for that, which is why it's great to hear about sustainable movements going on. So, as I said, I was excited when Luke approached me about this. I love speaking about human-centered design. I've been studying, practicing, and promoting this for the last 25 years. Yes, I'm an old man now. The world is unnecessarily complex. And if you talk to any designer, you'll find that designers are in design because they're frustrated with something. I'm frustrated with the complexity of the world. And we know why it's complex. It's driven by specialization. And human-centered design is simply a way to fix this. So I'm a curious guy. I've always been a curious guy, even as a little tot. I've always wanted to know how things work. Always wanted to unplug things, rebuild them from scratch. My grandmother is Dutch, and I used to go to the airport and see her walk down the gangway with hundreds of other people, hop on this huge metal beast, Boeing 727, and watch it scream down the runway and then leap into the air, take her safely to Holland and then return her safely to me. And I thought, that's amazing. This big complex metal beast can go all that way and come back. I want to get into that. I want to make that part of my life. So I gathered my resources, I did all my studies, I became a commercial pilot. Unfortunately, romance meets reality. Being a pilot is actually one of the most boring jobs in the world. You know, for a curious guy, my mind's always ticking over. I always want to understand things. But as a pilot, you have to maintain what's known as situational awareness, which means you need to look at these 6 dials for hours and hours at a time and make sure that nothing's going wrong on them. Not the best job for a curious guy. And so I decided, you know, I need to take a step back and think about what it is about aviation that still draws me, even though I hate flying now. And I thought back to my grandmother hopping on this big beast and it taking her away and then coming back. And it dawned upon me that this is probably the most complex form of transport for public transport. Yet it's the safest. And I wondered why. And so, curious guy took the better. And I went back to school and found out about it. This little aircraft here is arguably the beginning of this. It's the Boeing B-17. It was created by the US Armed Forces in World War II. It was a technological marvel. This thing had a really long range. It could carry a huge payload of bombs. It was a precision bomber. And you can see it's got multiple turrets all over it, so it had great protection. It could shoot in almost any direction, great protection from fighters. The thing that made it a technological marvel, however, was this thing was engineered to the max. It could take flak, it could take fighter ammunition hitting it. It could sustain almost any damage. It was indestructible almost. And so these guys would get up, fly their sortie, drop the bombs, get hit by flak, get shot up by fighters, and then limp home victorious for the aircraft to get patched up and then go back up again. At least that was the idea. When pilots came home, in some cases, they landed the aircraft and then just dug it into the ground. They would lift up the landing gear, dig all 4 props into the ground, blowing up all 4 engines, turning the indestructible aircraft into a pile of junk. Now, this didn't just happen once or twice. This happened on the B-17 alone 200 times in 22 months, and it was happening across aircraft. Well, of course, the brass wasn't so happy about this pilot error that kept occurring. You know, they said, what are we going to do about this? It was wartime. They needed as many pilots as they could, so they couldn't punish them, which is what would normally happen in the armed forces. They couldn't take them out of the air. What were they going to do? And so, since it was pilot error, they thought, well, we'll get a psychologist to find out what's wrong with these pilots. So a guy by the name of Alphonse Chapanis came along and he interviewed all the pilots that crashed their aircraft after landing them. He sat in the cockpits with them and had discussions. He actually took off and did takeoffs and landings with them to understand what types of things that they were doing. He noted a series of switches that were identical and all in close proximity to each other. Now, when you're landing an aircraft, you're flying in, you have to slow down the aircraft to land. And to do that, you extend flaps. That gives you a lot more lift at a lot lower speed. Now, when you touch down, you don't want to lift up into the air again. So you have to retract those flaps as soon as possible after landing and then taxi off. You can see the problem here. When people ask what I do, it is designing common sense in a lot of cases. The gear and the flaps are right next to each other. After doing a 10-hour sortie, being shot up, it's very easy to mistake one for the other. Now, Chapanis came back and said, here's your problem, engineers go fix it. Engineers said, we have assembly lines, we've pumped out thousands of aircraft, we can't retrofit all this. And so he went, oh, okay, well, let me grab some engineers, grab some pilots, and together we'll come up with some ideas. We'll generate as many ideas as possible. We'll test them. We'll see what we can come up with. Eventually, they came up with this elegant solution. It's called shape controls. On the end of the switch for the landing gear is a little rubber thing that feels and looks like a wheel. And on the end of the switch for the flaps is something that looks and feels like a flap. This means you don't have to actually think. The pilot could reach over and if he brushed the rubber wheel, he didn't have to think about it. He just knew to move over. It stopped all belly up landings. Solved it overnight. And it was really cheap. They could just whack it on all these aircraft and fixed the big problem. The idea that people don't have to think ahead of time, that they don't have to look, that they could just feel. This was design. And the important part of this is Chapanis reframed this from pilot error to design error. It was a bad design. Let's fix it. This, arguably, was the birth of human-centered design. He was given latitude to apply this to all aspects of aviation, everything from the cockpit design through to the way the pilots speak with each other and speak with the ground, through to the way the licensed aeromechanical engineers worked on the planes. And you know, the little stencils that you have on tool boards, that came out of this to make sure that after they worked on a plane, all the tools were back there and they didn't leave tools in the aircraft. It applied to all other aspects, the policies, the legislation, the procedures. He applied this thinking across everything in aviation. And that's what made it the safest form of transport. It's all designed with the human, the operators, the people in mind. So I left piloting, went back, studied human factors, got my master's in that, and then wanted to apply it to everything. And I worked across so many sectors, applying it to so many things with great results. And so I want to also apply it to councils, which is why I was excited to come and speak to you here today. So why is technology frustrating? Yeah, it's quite simple, actually. History tells us how we got here in the first place. Technology is something that simply enhances our abilities or gives us new abilities. It's something that we create that we can then pass the knowledge on to other people, and they can reproduce that, and they can refine it, and they can build on it and make it better. We started as early hominids, chipping flint. This was the early technology of us. We made sharp edges. We could cut and distribute meat. We could skin animals and create clothing. We could create arrowheads and spearheads. After that, you know, language helped us distribute these ideas, and then being able to write it down, distribute it further. We went through the Iron Age and the brass age, and all through working with metals. We created stronger tools. We then created more complex tools. We created machines. We moved from having horses power things to steam and coal and petroleum and now renewables. Technology evolved to become more powerful and complex. And that evolution wasn't a straight line evolution, dribbled along and then made these big jumps, often fueled by conflict. And World War II was one of those conflicts. So World War II basically supercharged mass production, the idea of the assembly line. And this is an important part. This is an inflection point for us. The assembly line was this idea that you don't need someone who knows how to build one of these magnificent beasts. You just need a whole lot of people trained to do a small part. They do their bit, pass it down the line. In doing this, they could actually pump out one of these complex aircraft an hour out of these factories, which was required for the wartime effort. But it also meant that this idea of the assembly line, because it was so successful, it pervaded all aspects of society. Culturally, we were driven towards specialization. People don't need to know a lot of stuff. They just need to know their little bit and pass it on to the next person. Those who designed and created our technologies basically became further divorced from those that would use it. This is why the B-17 and aircraft like it, even though they were technologically superior, even though they were engineered to the nth degree, they weren't that great for pilots. Now, specialization results in different understandings of how the world works. We muddle through the world. You know, you drive down the road and you see a traffic light change red and you stop. That's all you need to know about it. You don't need to know how the switching mechanisms work, how it's controlled by traffic controllers. However, a traffic engineer has a very different view of how those traffic lights work to you. In much the same way, me as a pilot, I find this beautiful. This may be daunting to you. It's the A320 cockpit. It's one of the most usable cockpits there are out there. It's a streamlined, easy to reach, easy to use system. The other thing about having a specialization is we create our own little tribes, and those little tribes we interact with every day. We develop our own language. As a pilot, I can speak in a language that doesn't mean much to you. Lawyers have legalese, marketers have marketing speak. Everyone has their own little language. Now think of non-council people using your technology, your services, your policies. They've got to be able to penetrate the language, the background knowledge that you have, the specialization skills. Those who design technology have a different mental model to those that use it. This is the mindset bit. This is where we have a different understanding of the world. Now, people often say to me, isn't all design human-centered? I mean, it's designed by humans for humans. Well, no, it's not. It's often centered around the people who commission whatever is being created, or those who actually have to design it. The most common type of design is engineer-centric design. This is designed for efficiency. So it always meets the technical requirements, which is great. And the idea of it is, if the person can't use it, we can fix it in training. We can give them a manual. We can use signage. What you see here is what's known in my industry as the Norman door. It is a perfectly good door, meets all the technical specifications. It is very efficient because you don't have to create right-hand doors and left-hand doors. You can hang the same door forwards or backwards because it's a mirror image of itself. It has handles on both sides. However, doors often only open one way. And so as people walk toward this door, instinctively, without having to think, you reach out and grab and pull. That's known as an affordance. Same with the shape controls on the aircraft. You don't have to consciously think about it. But unfortunately, you reach out and pull and it doesn't move. And you look down and see the push sign and you go, oh, I'm an idiot. Well, that's not user error. That's just bad design. And I bring this up, it's a trivial example, but we encounter thousands of these trivial examples all day, and it gets us pissed off with design. Another common type of design is business-centric design. This is designed for competition. Often it's technology looking for a solution. The idea behind this is you can fix it with marketing or advertising or sales. What you see here is the T-Hub. If any of you remember this was created around the time that the iPad was released, actually, the same year, 2010. Telcos worried that Apple, who had released the iPhone, was now going to take over the home phone as well. So these guys wanted to create a hub for the house, for all communications. Unfortunately, it was poorly thought out, poorly designed. They had pushy sales, get it out there, and it was a complete flop. People were wanting to send, they wanted their money back. ACCC got involved and everything. They stopped selling these things and just, being a good corporate, they took a step back, licked their paws, thought about this, and then released the second version of it, which was even worse. You see, it is very common for corporates to double down on these things because this is the mindset that they have. You know, it's let's fix it with marketing. It'll be okay on the day. There's another common type of design, which is politically based design. And this happens not only in government, but in large organizations as well. Utopia is always a funny thing to watch. You know, the minister-centric design is about the announceables. But what I want to get to with this is more around, there is a lot of design by committee that goes on. Now, design by committee is very different from human-centered design. We'll touch on that a bit later. But this is trying to do the right thing and going out and talking to all the different stakeholders that are involved and getting them to give input, but you're doing it at different times. And this can often result in a compromise that doesn't really solve too many people's problems. So, what is human-centric design? It's a really simple thing. For you guys, it is a way to understand what small businesses need, the journey that they're on, and how to design effective technology, policies, procedures, services to support their goals. It's about developing empathy for the user and empathy for those that are affected by whatever you are creating and putting out into the world. It's about creating solutions that fit the mindset or the mental model of those that need to use it. So it'll be intuitive. And it's simply these 3 steps. Understand the problem space, understand the issue that you're trying to solve, which is often a big trip up. Then co-design some ideas for solutions, much like Chapanis did with the engineers and pilots, and test and iterate them. That's all this is. It just goes around in a circle. It's quite simple. So let's dig into understanding the problem space. This is about developing the empathy, being able to see the world through someone else's eyes. The first thing I often hear when I start with a new client is, oh, you don't have to worry about the research. I know what the problem is. Unfortunately, mostly they're wrong. We say, can we just do a little bit of research and dig in and find that what they thought the problem was is usually a symptom. The problem actually started a few steps back. There's also opportunities in there that come to light when you actually understand the problem space. The first part of doing that is basically talking to people, talking to those that are impacted by what you're creating. We want to talk to those that the technology or policy or whatever is supposed to serve. We need to understand their skills and understand their knowledge, understand the language that they use. We want to understand the mental model or mindset of how they think things work in this domain. And we need that if we're going to create something that's intuitive for them. Most importantly, we need to understand what their overarching goal is. You know, no one wants to fill out a form. They want to start a cafe. No one wants to put in an application. They want to build something. I was doing some work with an investment group, and they had wealth packages that were sold by wealth advisors. And they said, they brought us in because they said, we've just released something that makes their job easier. And they've all stopped selling our wealth packages. Why is this? And so I went out and I talked to them and found out that, you know, this new system that they'd created, yes, it was fancy, it was great, they'd spent lots of money on it, and it allowed them to do projections. They thought that these guys that were selling the wealth packages would sit with their clients and go through all these scenarios and projections, and it would help them with a sale. That was their assumption of how things worked. Turned out these guys hated technology. They were just old white guys, that salesmen that wanted to chat to their clients. They used a piece of paper, and they wanted a better piece of paper. Next part of understanding the problem space is getting out into the world, getting out of your office. That's where all the assumptions happen. You're surrounded by your own people. Context is critical. It shapes the way we behave, much like the affordance of the door handle or the shape controls. Our environment shapes the way we behave. It's important to know, where will people be using your technology or your service? What else are they doing? You know, how noisy is it? How bright is it? How dark is it? How much space do they have? Do they have both arms available? This was from a health project that we were doing, just trying to convey to the engineers that, a doctor in an emergency ward doesn't have the luxury of logging into 3 different systems and sitting at a computer like they do. They're trying to juggle a lot of things. We've got a client at the moment. We're helping with vets that are auditing animal processing, and they basically came to us and said, look, they're being very inefficient about this. They're scribbling down their notes in the field, going back to their car or going home, and then typing them up into the system. Let's make it easier for them. And the engineers jumped up straight away and said, don't need to go out into the field. It's okay. We have a new technology that we've just acquired, which is a really accurate voice-to-text technology. So they can just take their phones out in the field and do their audits on their phones. Well, we went out, and I don't know how many of you have been to an animal processing plant, but it's noisy. Actually understanding the environment that people are in. Not only that, the guys were scribbling down notes because they were doing it in a weird shorthand. So the person that they were auditing couldn't look over their shoulders. So can you imagine someone screaming into a phone to try and get over the noise? Didn't work. It was the exact opposite of what they needed. Now, back to the beginning, everything exists within a system. It's important to acknowledge that you don't own all of that system, that you are a part of it. And also important to acknowledge that goals unfold over time. I don't wake up in the morning and say, I want to start a cafe, and then by afternoon, I've got a cafe. These things take time, and I have to interact with all levels of government and accountants and lawyers and all these different types of people. So it's important to actually map the journey that people have, to appreciate the journey that they're going to be on. If you can do this, then that will help you, because you'll know what they've already done in the past and what they're going to need to do in the future. So you can create whatever you're creating to help leverage what's come before and help them for what's coming after. The other part of mapping the journey is you can often see, when you zoom out and get this big picture, you can see where issues occur. This was the federal government asked us to look into why international students were dropping off in Australia. They'd been doing some marketing pushes. They were about to spend a lot more on the marketing pushes because they just weren't working. So we went out and interviewed lots of people, created a nice little journey. We interviewed people from the time that they started thinking about coming to Australia to study to, when they had already finished their studies and gotten a career. One of the things that we noted was, especially with students that were about to come to Australia, was, you see this big dip here, the red, that's, their anxiety, fear, dread. Think about if you were a German student, someone in Germany, you've got a part-time job, you're renting with friends, you've got to give all that up, you've got to buy your tickets, you've got to organise everything for coming to Australia to study. They apply for their visa and then they haven't heard anything back. There's no way to check on their visa. They send emails, get nothing back. They pick up the phone and call and they're on an international call for an hour and it just hangs up. We came across quite a few students that gave us this story. And so we said, what's happening? Is your contact center really overloaded or something? Turns out there was a restructure. And in that restructure, there was a role that looked after this that no longer existed. And so the emails were going into the ether and the telephone calls were going to a soft phone number that didn't have anywhere to ring. So being able to zoom out, you can actually understand root causes of things. You need to zoom out to understand what people need to do to achieve their goals. You can help find those root causes and issues and opportunities. This helps you create things that help, not hinder, making things that are more intuitive. You can also address points in a more strategic manner. You can see what needs to be prioritized and what should be addressed first if you can appreciate the whole journey. Next part is co-designing solutions. So looking at problems from multiple perspectives all at the same time, like the blind man. Oh, sorry, we'll get to that. Lincoln was famous for gathering a team of rivals for his cabinet. And this was important at the time. The US was in a lot of strife. And he even included his most ardent denouncers. The genius of this was he had a cabinet that had a diverse number of perspectives to try and get them through these really tough times. Having rivals in the room challenged things. It minimized the groupthink. And not only that, it neutralized any centers of opposition because everyone wanted the same thing. They were all working toward the same thing. They were just seeing it from different perspectives. And when they're in the room together, they could understand each other's perspectives. That's the difference between design by committee and co-design. Having people work on something at the same time instead of sending it down an assembly line. Ideating with multidisciplinary teams, having diverse perspectives. This is a great argument for inclusion and diversity as well. When you have differing mental models, different things can mean different things to different people. Once you understand a problem or opportunity, you need to involve those that have a stake in it or will be involved or impacted by it. I was working with a bank a few years back, and that bank had an innovation hub. And I went and talked to the guys in the innovation hub, and they said, I said, how are things going? What's happening with all these great ideas you're generating? They said, oh, we pump out 5 good ideas a quarter. And we develop them and the business supports them and everything's going great. It gets to legal and they just squash it. We've never had anything released. And so we simply brought legal into the team. We had a multidisciplinary team and had all the right people in there. And when ideas came up, legal might say, well, legally we can't do that. But the flip side of it was because they understood the problem that we were trying to solve, they would say, but you could try this. They brought their perspective to it and helped solve the problems. And then that bank became one of the most innovative banks, pumping out more and more products. Simple things, it's common sense. You know, assembly lines are great for doing something that's stable, for repeating the same process over and over again. They're just useless for creating something new, for innovation. We need everyone working together at the same time. Also, we need to involve those that will use whatever you're creating or be impacted by it. For technology to be intuitive, it has to fit the mental model of the person that is using it. So you need to involve them to bust any assumptions. You have to understand their mindset, and involve their mindset. Involve people who will also be impacted by this. Second order impacts. This is where diversity is really, really important, because you will avoid unintended consequences if everyone is in the room at the same time. I was working after the Black Summer fires. I was working with some communities on natural disaster resilience. And we wanted them to become more resilient, but often when a natural disaster occurred, a lot of well-meaning people jump in and they're at loggerheads with each other. So we did a future casting exercise. I wanted them to think, 10 years from now, let's think that your community really, really did well. It was resilient, survived a big disaster. Write an article that says what you did today to make that happen. So that's a simple future casting exercise. Importantly, though, we involved in these groups writing this article affected community members, volunteers, emergency services, charities, councils, all the people who are normally at loggerheads with these things or clashed at certain points. We involved them all, and they worked together to come up with ways to minimize the impact of natural disasters for their community. Another thing about this, co-designing solutions generate as many ideas as possible. Ideas are cheap. You need to test lots of them before you come up with something that's really good. It's very easy to get locked onto an idea. So the really important thing to strive against here is to be prepared to throw away your ideas and don't spend any time on any one idea, because we all are human and we suffer from a few biases, and one of them is sunk cost fallacy. The more effort we put into something, the more we value it. And if we value it, we are resistant to evidence that says it's a bad idea. That's how bad ideas just keep going. So, COVID-19 still with us. Always have to bring it up in a presentation. This evolves so it can evade vaccines. And it does this because it's got a large enough pool of hosts. Mutations occur in that large pool of hosts. Now, the vaccine might stop most, but some of these mutations will make it look different to the rest of it, and so it can evade the vaccine. They reproduce and become the dominant strain. Alpha, Delta, Omicron, we get these waves. This is the process of evolution: variance, selection, heredity. It works in viruses and genetics. It also works in culture. Memes are the cultural equivalent to genes. Lots go out there on the internet these days. Some get shared. They get spread across the internet and built upon. It also happens with technology. Now, we moved from sharing the idea of chipping flint to quantum computing in a relatively short time span because of this variant selection heredity. Science, business, and engineering are our ways of propagating these ideas and new technologies. And it happens at a macro scale across industries and across the world, but it also happens at a micro scale if you're developing an app or a service. No matter what form it's in, information has this universal process of evolution: variance, selection, and heredity. So, variance. You want as many ideas as possible and start simple. Capture ideas in the simplest possible way to communicate them. Generating many ideas is easy when you've got a diverse group of people, as we said. Ideas are cheap. Don't let any of them become your darlings, because you're then going to test these ideas. Put them in front of the people that are going to use them. This is selection, testing ideas not only with users, but with stakeholders. Most ideas will suck when you test them in front of people because it doesn't meet people's mental models. But some will resonate. These are desirable. Testing it with your tech team or your legal team or your compliance and audit, whoever. Some of these things won't be possible, but some will be. These are feasible. You've got to test it with your stakeholders, your funders, people who are going to give you the resources to do this. Now, some will be unsustainable. Some will be unaffordable. Others will be viable. We want these desirable, feasible, and viable ideas because they're your surviving ideas. And when you have a surviving idea and you do it quick and dirty as you can, then you can build on success. You take the surviving ideas and build them out. You vary them. You go through the process again. We were creating a digital solution just recently. We started on with pen and paper. We did it with Post-it notes. And then we took that, put it into wireframes and prototypes. We took that and then created a version that was going to be released to a very small group of people, an alpha version. We learned from that, and then we were able to rebuild it into something better and create a beta version. And then we released the product live after we'd learned at every stage along the line. This approach helps you from investing in things that aren't going to help people. It de-risks it at every step of the way. And releasing it to the world isn't the end. Releasing a product, a service, a policy, that's not the end because change is constant. The world is always changing. You've got to change mindset from a project to a product. Even a policy is a product. It's got to adapt to the world. I was lucky enough to get a Tesla many years ago. It was a basic car. It was an electric car that was basic. The longer I've owned it, the more features have come to it. Even the battery, as it physically degraded, my range got better because they were releasing over-the-air updates that managed the energy performance. Then I got a dog, and just at that time, they released doggy mode, which meant you could leave your dog in the car and it keeps the air conditioning on and puts a sign up that says, my owner's away, but I'm cool in here. And just before I came up here, I had all the shopping. Going to the back of the car, your phone is your key. It's a Bluetooth key. I stepped up to the back of the car, it beeped 3 times, and the boot opened. New feature that just came out a few weeks ago. So this is how you keep things evolving as they get out into the world. So what's the impact of human-centered design? Well, if you look at the S&P 500 companies that take this approach, generally 200% higher. The Magnificent Seven in the tech sector are thousands of percent higher than everyone else. I got to work on whatif.com in the early days, got to do that from the garage to make it the biggest and most successful last-minute accommodation in Australia. I recently got to work on a tattoo removal service a couple of years ago, and we got to design everything, the policies, the procedures, the operations, everything. And it went from nothing to the largest tattoo removal service in the world in the space of 2 years. Commercial aviation keeps getting safer. It learns and adapts to every incident. It's now 2,200 times safer to hop in a commercial aircraft than it is to hop in your car. And elegant solutions have longevity. You can see on here these shape controls. This is the A350-1000, the most recent aircraft. Every aircraft has these shape controls still in them today, 80 years later. This is simply about developing empathy, understanding the mindset of others, understanding their mental model, co-designing ideas with them, testing and iterating solutions with them. You'll end up with things that are usable, useful, and most importantly, used. Now, you're about to hear from some councils that have practiced empathy and gone out and taken a human-centered approach. The most important thing I want you to walk away with today as I close is to get out of the office. Speak to those that will use your technology, your policies, your services. The link here, if you scan it, it's got a bunch of links behind it because this isn't new. The federal government has got a playbook for it. State governments have playbooks for it and resources and training. Now it's your turn to go out and take this human-centered approach. Make the lives of your small businesses easier. Make your communities thrive. Please question me throughout the day. Pepper me with anything. I'm a curious guy. I love to be able to transfer what might be a bit esoteric for you into your specific circumstances. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Ash, for that presentation. And I think one of the things that certainly resonated for me was really about that understanding the problem before you jump to the solutions. I think for many of us in council, I'm sure many of you experienced that thing where you've had those tech companies and others come to you and say, I've got the solution you need. And we sort of think, well, I didn't even realize I had a problem, and they've already got the solution. So I think that's something that's critically important as well. So as I said, we've got some time for questions for Ash. And I think we've got some roving mics with Sharon here. So has anyone got any questions? Stick your hand up. Yes. We've got one over here. Thank you.
So much. That's super interesting. I'm just curious what books you recommend reading that have got some of these great stories.
Actually, there's a wonderful one called The Human Factor by Kim Vicente. And that one just looks at the whole field and how it's applied across many different industries. Yeah.
Any other questions in the room?
I've got hundreds of books, by the way.
One down here. Sharon, I think we've got one down here. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So doing consultations, doing them separately, that's where it becomes design by committee. When you get people in a room and have a well-articulated problem and talk about it, then you have all the different perspectives, and they learn in those little meetings. They learn from each other's perspectives. They understand what's possible and what's not. That's how you avoid the design by committee. If you do multiple sessions and do consultations left, right, and centre, that's where it just becomes compromise. So get the right people in the room at the right time.
Right. Anyone else? One thing I might ask Ash is,
yep.
I think there's that thing with, I guess, in local government, we can become internalised a bit, and I think we often have those meetings where we say, oh, we need to get together and work out how we're going to make life better for the community. And when we say get together, it's all internal people looking at that. How do we reach out, and how do you need to do that right at the start of your problem solving, or you do it partway through? When's the right time, and how to engage with the community?
The right time is right from the beginning. You know, instead of having an office where everyone's getting together internally, go out into the community and say, here's an open discussion. You know, I've seen some great things happen in libraries where you don't have to go bigger than Ben-Hur. You start small. Just start talking to people and getting their feedback straight away. Yeah.
Okay, any other questions before I let Ash leave the stage?
He promised me a hard one.
You did all right, I thought. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's thank Ash.
Thank you very much.